Hey guys, my name is Leah Cook with Sandpaper and Wax Design. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. Today I'm going to talk to you about using Amy Howard's new LuxeLacquer paint system and the best way to get a good finish without any roping. Those are the lines that you see in the finish or any orange peel, and how to lay it down correctly. I'll talk about the methods I use and what I've found in best practices. You know, if this is your first time using an oil-based enamel, I think this is a great opportunity. I think if you've never even painted before, learn on an oil enamel and everything else is cake. So I'll be upfront. The most important thing you're gonna do, 80% of a perfect finish, is what you do before you actually put on your enamel base coat, your final coat. So everything is all the filling, all the grain filling, all the priming, sanding between each coat, making sure that your surface is perfectly flat before you start laying down your actual pigment color. You will, if you see lines in your primer, you will see lines in the finish and magnified, because a gloss brilliant finish will magnify any imperfection. So most important thing, prime. And I'll stand by this. You should always be priming, always. Go ahead and you're wanting to sand your surface. So before you even sand your surface, just to be safe, if your piece is after 1976, I believe, you want to go ahead and have it tested for lead paint if it has an existing finish or a stain, just to be safe. You want to make sure you're using the correct PPE. This is an oil-based paint, so it has VOCs. You don't want children in the room. You want to make sure everything is ventilated. You want to make sure you're using a dust mask for when you're sanding and when you're sanding that primer. And then you want to make sure you're using an organic vapor barrier when you are sanding your in-between coats. And you should be using the vapor barrier if it's an oil-based primer too, so when you're applying. But always wear a dust mask when you're sanding in between coats. Things to make sure you do end with a perfect finish. You want to mitigate dust, and you want to be able to control your humidity. Humidity will cause your paint to sag or run. It can affect your dry times. The longer the paint doesn't dry, the more chances for contaminants to get into your coat and to mar your finish. So having an enclosed environment is really important. If this is a product for a client, you know, you can't have any contaminants in your paint. You don't want roping. You don't want orange peel. You want that perfect finish. Otherwise, as they say in the military, it's unsat. So before we get started, make sure that you sand. You really clean your surface well. I'm going to skip that. I think you guys know how to do that. You can use your clean slate, wipe it down really well, go ahead and sand, clean slate it again. If you need to grain fill for an oil-based, I would use a Swedish putty to fill in for grain, and then you would prime over that Swedish grain or the Swedish putty. I do 2 coats of primer. Remember, 80% of that perfect finish is what you do in the front, because the backside, you know, you can't hide a poor foundation. So make sure that your surface is perfect. If not, go ahead and start sanding that. Use 220 grit as your highest grit. If it doesn't start taking down that finish to a perfect finish, go ahead and move to 180. You can, and then work your way down if you have to, and then go ahead and prime from there. So again, base coat's really important. Brushes, I'm gonna talk about brushes. I use all natural animal hair brushes. These are the Omega Sash brush, Omega 2-inch brush, and then for detail I use all Your brushes need to be quality brushes. And the reason I use animal hair, it holds the paint better and it has a flared edge, which will lay down that paint more smoothly. Whereas a synthetic brush won't carry as much paint and won't lay it down as evenly. You will also need to have mineral spirits to clean your brushes. Again, invest in a good brush. You don't want to roll it. You don't want to use a sponge brush. Invest in a quality brush to lay down your paint, and then take care of those brushes because they'll show great results. So when you are working, I do recommend you work from a working cup and not out of the can. So anytime you are working from a can, you're allowing the paint to be exposed to the air, and now you're also contaminating your can. So when you go to thin out your paint, go ahead and pour out your product, thin it out about 5% with either Penetrol, or you could do mineral spirits. And the viscosity test for a oil paint is you need to make sure that you completely stir this. I usually set a timer for about 3 minutes. And I watch the paint drip from my stir stick into the paint level. If the paint disperses in your mixing cup or your working can or working cup, then you know that you're at the correct viscosity, it's mixed well, and now you can go ahead and start painting. Other things you need to know. Again, just personal protection is really important. This does have VOCs, so make sure you are wearing your appropriate face mask and your workspace is properly ventilated. Okay, let's get started. All right, so we are going to wrap this up and talk about bring it all back and talk about what we need to focus on and materials that I found useful. So first things first, remember when you start, you guys definitely have to use your mask, okay? Remember, filters are only good for 30 days. So once you open that mask, to keep it properly stored, put it in a plastic bag and keep it zip-locked 30 days, that filter, and you'll have to replace the filters. Really important for the organic vapor masks, filters, is that you write the date on them and make sure you replace them before you start your next project. Little things that I have found useful: plastic sheeting. Make sure you tape off your space and create a clean environment. You want to vacuum, and I would mop before you paint, probably a couple hours before you paint, kind of settle that dirt down or dust down. You can't believe how, you might have the cleanest house in the world, but our air is dirty. So really important to have a clean space. Let's see, make sure you have proper stir sticks. We don't want to contaminate your paints. Looking for the other stuff I have. And here, I'm going to show you guys the best way to clean your paintbrushes, especially with oil. I've had this for a while. The Rome Wild Dandy. It's awesome. Looks like a silencer. But what I do is I have a bucket, especially when I'm at projects, I have a bucket of mineral spirits that I can close and keep it contained. And I dip my brush in, clean that brush, and especially if I have to travel, you load your brush in, lock it in, and once you clean your brush in that mineral spirits, put it back in the container, and this will go ahead and get all that. And so now you've made sure that your brush is clean. These are expensive, so you want to keep your tools properly stored. What else do I find handy? I use this guy. So I have found that keeping the viscosity for oil paints without having to add as much additive or thinner, because you want to keep your paint and the state you received it, because that's how you're going to get that really beautiful shine. I keep it with some water, and I just keep it warm in a little bit of a bath. Periodically, I'll turn it off, turn it back on when I notice the viscosity increasing. So having a bath in your working cup in the bath of warm water will help the flow of the paint if you don't want to add too much additive. Always have some mineral spirits, your penetrol. Now, there's a difference between mineral spirits and penetrol. Penetrol is an additive that will help your paint flow, but it also has an adhesive quality to it too. So you're changing the chemical makeup of your paint, so just careful with how much you add. For this project, I went through an entire can of primer. So that's how much I stand behind my primers. There's a reason we prime. It keeps the paint luminous. It displays the pigmentation of your final coat correctly, and I think it really does. In most paint systems, priming will enhance the color, the saturation, the sheen. So you need to prime. And every primer is different. I've noticed with oil paints. This is a good one, but it definitely adds to that vibrancy for the color. It adds for the gloss. There's a reason why it's a system. So use your primer. Sometimes, especially on some pieces, you're gonna go 2 coats, 3 coats, sometimes 5 coats. So priming is really important, especially for oil paint. I say for any paint. There's a reason why we use grounds for paint. Primer is important. If you're gonna gild, which I do plan to do with this, use an oil base if you're like an oil paint. But for this piece, I actually want to oil gild. So you can gild before it's completely cured within the first couple of days. Unfortunately though, when that goldie starts flying around, it can embed into the paint and cure. So I recommend waiting till your piece is completely cured, which is 21 days, and then go ahead and use your oil-based size and gild that way. Or you can use an oil-based metallic and gild. So I plan to gild all the decorative trim on this piece. So I'm gonna wait till it cures because I don't want to lay the piece down while I'm working on it to only leave an impression in the paint. It's really important that you let your piece fully cure. And you have to explain that to clients. They don't get like this whole timeline of paint. But once it reaches that time, it's gonna be an impervious, beautiful finish. So really impress that upon your clients and customers. Brushes, quality brushes. I like animal bristle. Some people like other brushes, but I'm gonna stick with the Italians on this one. What else? Oh, sandpaper. So we're gonna talk about sandpaper. Make sure you have an array of grit. 200 for the getting your base ready, 200 to sand the primer. Second coat of primer, you want to use 400. After that first coat of paint, when you sand your first coat of the Lux, 600. Okay, and then you're gonna, just like I showed you, you're going to fully coat. Then you're going to, that's your coverage coat. Then you're gonna dip back in about a quarter of that brush in. You're gonna tap on both sides, pack the paint on the brush, feather it out really pretty. And my advice to you, just don't keep going over it. And you wanna keep in one direction, especially when you're feathering out, when you're tapping out the, that after the full coverage coat, then you pack your brush, feather it out in one direction. Don't go back and forth. If you make a mistake, let it dry. You're gonna have to sand that out and then do it again. I'm sorry. This is a prima donna paint, but you're gonna charge prima donna prices. So there's a lot of work for it to get this gorgeous finish, but it's worth it. And once you get the feel of it, it is actually really easy, but it's just all the work in the front. Making sure your environment's clean, making sure everything is dusted correctly, that your surface is completely flat. There are no bumps. It can be smooth and still have lots of bumps, but you're looking for a completely flat surface. You're gonna learn to feel what your brush feels like when it's dragging and pulling. You're gonna know what your brush feels like when it's full. The more you do it, the better you're gonna get, the easier it's gonna get. I think brushing is actually easier than spraying. I'm gonna stand by that too. I'm a painter by brush, so for me, a brush feels really comfortable in my hand. A sprayer, I feel like getting the viscosity correct, perfectly anematizing that paint to come out of the gun perfectly, you know, for me, that causes anxiety. So for me, a brush, you know, I could brush this, I kid you not, in 5 minutes. Like, that's how fast it's moving. So I prefer a brush, but that's, you know, everyone's different. Make sure PPE, environment's clean. Have a bucket with your mineral spirits so you can clean your brushes and tools immediately, because this stuff is sticky and it does not come off with water and soap. So you got to make sure you have rags. Oh, and really important, when I speak about primer, if you're painting over an existing surface that you know is a waterborne pre-cat lacquer, it's kind of a little bit of a game changer here. You cannot use an oil-based primer over a pre-cat lacquer. You have to use an acrylic universal primer if you're going to use oil. If you do not, your paint's never gonna fully, like, not fully dry, but it's just never gonna look right, and it is not gonna dry, and you're gonna have all kinds of bleed, you're gonna have all kinds of strange things happening. So again, I know a lot of people have started with that pre-cat lacquer and ooh, it's so cool. But if you're gonna use that oil base, you can't use the oil primer over it. You need to use an acrylic universal primer. Just putting it out there, ask me how I know. And have fun, practice. The more you practice, the better you're gonna get. Don't sign up for a big project and you've never done it before. You know, sometimes you're gonna do a piece and you're gonna be like, oh my God, and just sand it all the way back down to the primer. And that's okay. So don't be afraid, enjoy it. This is a great paint system. I really imply system is really important. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. I will try to get to them, or someone who might know about oil will get to them, but I definitely will. Follow my Instagram, as I am going to be doing a really big project, and I'm going to be setting up an enclosure. I will teach you guys how to do that in my blog, but next time. So I hope you enjoy this paint. It's a great paint. This is Peony Blossom. Really pretty color, out of my color normal range. But thanks for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. Take care.